Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight.
Today we made history bringing a casino, hopefully in the very near future, to Chicago.
The Bally's casino proposal passes. We dig into that and much more from today's City Council meeting.
You are out of order and you are lying. Almost every word that comes out of your mouth after you say your name is a lie. You need to stop.
Plus, a fiery exchange inside City Hall. Our Spotlight Politics team is here to break down what happened.
Another day in America. Another mass shooting.
The shooting at a Texas school spurs calls for action, but will anything come of it?
On the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, a look at efforts to increase civilian police oversight across the country.
Everything we talked about in the future is never going to become possible because he's not here.
Turning pain into purpose, the latest in our Chicago Tonight series on the impact of gun violence on victims' families.
A new Northwestern study shows how brain fog and fatigue are still affecting COVID long haulers.
On the phone, it said Ukraine, so I answered the phone.
And how war in Ukraine complicated bringing twin preemies born via surrogate home to their parents in Highland Park. But first, some of today's top stories. We're learning more today about the 21 victims, including 19 children, killed in yesterday's tragic mass shooting at a Texas elementary school. Among them, 10-year-old fourth grader Lexi Rubio, whose father is a deputy in the Uvalde County Sheriff's Office, and among the many officers who responded to the scene.
All I can hope is that she's just not a number. Hopefully something gets resolved. That's all we ask. Hopefully something gets resolved.
I know this is very difficult, but what would you like to get resolved? What would you like to see resolved at this point?
Damn violence, guns. I'm a cop. I'm a deputy here in Uvalde County. This is enough. This is enough. No one else needs to go through this.
During a news conference today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott revealed that the 18-year-old shooter sent messages to a 15-year-old girl in Germany. In the messages, the shooter reportedly complained about his grandmother minutes before saying that he'd shot her and said that he was going to, quote, shoot up an elementary school right now. Investigators still shed no light on a motive for the attack, which also left 17 people wounded. A 22-year-old Chicago man is facing federal charges for allegedly selling 7 ghost guns on 5 occasions. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Devin Dow sold the guns to an undercover law enforcement officer from a parking lot in the city's Grand Crossing neighborhood. Officials say the guns are considered ghost guns because they have no identifiable serial number and were assembled using parts collected from various sources. Dow's detention hearing is set for Friday. To commemorate the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, activists planned a candlelight vigil at the intersection where he died, as well as a rally at the governor's residence in Minnesota. You'll recall Floyd's death touched off a wave of protests and demonstrations in the summer of 2020. The city of Minneapolis also planned to unveil a street sign at that intersection where Floyd died, officially naming it George Perry Floyd Square. While former police officer Derek Chauvin is serving 22.5 years in prison for Floyd's murder, 2 other former officers are scheduled to stand trial on state charges next month. And on that anniversary, the Biden administration signs an executive order that builds on previous policing reforms.
The executive order modernizes policing. It calls for a fresh approach to recruit, train, promote, and retrain law enforcement that tied to advancing public safety and public trust.
The order mandates the creation of a new national database of police misconduct to be used by all federal law enforcement agencies and local officers who join federal task forces. The order also bans federal law enforcement officers from using chokeholds unless deadly force is authorized and requires them to intervene in cases of excessive force if they see it and administer medical aid to injured persons. Up next, a Chicago curfew passes. That and more City Council business. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabie Family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot's push to extend and expand Chicago's teen curfew is now law. City Council voted 30-19 in favor of the curfew that would apply to those 17 and younger every night starting at 10. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, there's so much controversy over this proposal, which the mayor unveiled after the May 14th killing of 16-year-old Shondell Holliday in the heart of Millennium Park. Let's listen to Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa, who joined the City Council's Progressive Caucus in voting against the proposal.
It's clear. Expanding teen curfew leads to an increase in gun violence. A vote for this ordinance is a vote to increase gun violence.
Heather, what was the mayor's response to that criticism?
Well, she called it offensive and said she was certain that it would help reduce crime. And she responded sarcastically at the impassioned pleas from alder people like we just heard from Carlos Ramirez Rosa and Alderman Andre Vasquez to not do this. And she said it was, quote unquote, not earth shattering to move the curfew up an hour on the weekends and include 17-year-olds. Teens 16 years old and under have always been included in Chicago's teen curfew.
And supporters, on the other hand, Heather, said something had to be done about the violence that threatens to spill out of control as the weather warms. Let's listen to Alderman Chris Taliaferro, who voted for it.
We say and we claim and we hold the title of being a world-class city. Well, Madam President, I ask, how can we claim that title if we are not doing our very best to make sure that the residents of the city of Chicago are safe?
So, Heather, was this the argument that basically won the day today?
It was. It's hard to understate how much pressure alder people and the mayor are under to get a hold of the crime that really appears to be spiraling out of control downtown. It was not only the death of Shondell near the Bean, but it was also the mass shooting near Chicago and State. And this is clearly going to give those who want to show that they're tough on crime something to point to. I should mention that two very particular alder people joined the Progressive Caucus in voting against this. They were Alderman Pat Dowell and Alderman Gilbert Villegas. Both are running for Congress in separate races, and both voted no, which I think could be an indication that the politics of this issue are a little more complicated than perhaps the mayor thinks. Certainly
very tricky politics here. All right, the other major order of business today, that massive Bally's casino proposal. After all of the hullabaloo, it passes by a 41-7 vote, and we're going to get into this more in Spotlight Politics. But what is next?
Well, it heads to the Illinois Gaming Board, and no doubt a Lightfoot re-election campaign commercial coming to a television station and website soon. There is no doubt that the mayor is going to seek to capitalize on this because it has been in the works for 30 years, and she was immediately proud of the fact that they have crossed this hurdle and that she was the mayor who got it done. Not mayors named Daley or mayors named Emanuel, but Lightfoot.
And boy, did that happen quick. Heather, the council also had another meeting later in the day to address violence. Once again, this one a little more antagonistic to the mayor. What happened at that meeting?
Not much. It lasted all of 19 minutes. The mayor did not show up. Superintendent David Brown did not show up. CPS CEO Pedro Martinez did not show up. And Chicago Parks CEO Rosa Escareno did not show up. So they heard some public testimony, and then enough alder people left that they didn't have quorum anymore, and that was all she wrote.
All right, well, Heather, it's not all she wrote for you because we're going to see you again later in the program for Spotlight Politics. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news. Texas officials are still investigating yesterday's tragic shooting at a Texas elementary school that has left 19 students and 2 teachers dead. It's a grisly crime, but not necessarily uncommon. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with a look at what changes may happen in the wake of this latest tragedy. Amanda.
Paris, changes that may happen or not, as you said, not particularly uncommon. So far this year, there have been 24 shootings in kindergarten through high school American classrooms this year. That was the sobering statistic given by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin in his opening remarks of the Senate Judiciary Committee that he chaired today. Senators were questioning President Biden's nominee for the director of the nation's top gun enforcement agency, a position, by the way, that has been left vacant for 7 years. Durbin alleged that the gun lobby wants it that way. Now, this even as Biden's nominee for head of the ATF told senators that violent crime, hate crimes, extremism, and mass shootings have increased.
Firearms violence and mass shootings are increasing. Hate crimes and religious violence are increasing, as is violent extremism. If confirmed, I promise to do everything I can to enforce the law.
For some, like Tom Vandenberg, the answer to all of that violence is passing laws that keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Vandenberg's son was killed in the early 90s in gun crossfire while he was at a party. And now Vandenberg heads GPAC. That's a political action committee that seeks to use the power of politics and persuasion to pass gun laws.
You just cannot have deranged 18-year-olds, if you will, individuals with serious mental health problems have such access to lethal weapons that can, as you see, just massacre a country, a city, a school. We have a serious problem in this country, and we're afraid to face it. We in Illinois think we're taking a step in the right direction to make that happen.
To that end, GPAC has helped to fight for laws passed in recent years here, including a red flag law that provides a path to keep those deemed by courts to be a danger to themselves or to others from having a gun. Also in Illinois, gun owners have to have a state FOID license, and gun owners must also be licensed. Just this spring, a new law making illegal guns without serial numbers, those ghost guns. There is, however, no federal law requiring background checks, and GPAC's Vandenberg says that's because of lawmakers who are intimidated by the National Rifle Association. But in Texas today, Governor Greg Abbott, who, by the way, is scheduled on Friday to speak at an NRA conference in Houston, questioned if Illinois' laws are so strong, why the surge in violence in Chicago?
I hate to say this, but there are more people who were shot every weekend in Chicago than there are in schools in Texas. And we need to realize that people who think that, well, maybe if we could just implement tougher gun laws, it's going to solve it. Chicago and LA and New York disprove that thesis. And so if you're looking for a real solution, Chicago teaches that what you're talking about is not a real solution.
Vandenberg says that is a lie. Northwestern University's Lori Post, who researches mass shootings, indirectly pushed back on what Abbott said. She says that federal laws are needed because otherwise there's a patchwork. She says gun restrictions only as strong as the weakest link. Somebody can easily drive across a border to get a gun that would be illegal in any particular state. Post also says that her research shows mass shootings declined for the decade that a federal ban on military-grade weapons was in effect. And it's not just because those weapons are more lethal. There were also fewer mass shootings, period.
Because basically, men who commit mass shootings, they need to feel hyper masculine, and the way they feel that way is hurting little children, hurting, innocent people that are unarmed, and they don't want to go to that kind of a mass shooting or a massacre unless they're properly armed with, assault weapons. So take that away, and they lose a lot of their confidence that they can kill as many people as possible.
So want to reduce mass shootings, she says reinstate a federal assault weapons and high capacity magazines ban. She also says it's important to have in place methods to spot those like the Texas shooter who there's evidence could be plotting these crimes. Now, at that nomination hearing for the ATF director, Utah Senator Mike Lee says that following tragedies like we saw in Texas, there's often a failure to examine the root causes of what he called rampage violence.
Why is our culture suddenly producing so many young men who want to murder innocent people? It raises questions like, could things like fatherlessness, the breakdown of families, isolation from civil society, or the glorification of violence be contributing factors? Instead, the left, once again, is calling for more gun control.
Some have suggested as a solution to have armed security guards posted at schools or for teachers themselves to carry weapons. Now, that is something that the Illinois Education Association's vice president, himself a former math teacher in high schools, says he rejects.
Just like we do not support arming educators, we do not support us requiring teachers to be mental health experts. We need psychologists, we need social workers with realistic caseloads. I worked in an area where we had one social worker for every 800 kids. You can't handle that.
Now, Illinois has, since 2019, had a state law requiring schools to have threat assessment teams and plans. A new law, really just signed a couple weeks ago, will allow the state to track whether districts are in compliance, whether they actually have those threat assessment plans in place. With that, Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, thank you very much. And now to Brandis with a look at a new survey about civilian police oversight across 100 U.S. cities. Brandis.
In Paris, as we mentioned earlier, today marks 2 years since the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. Floyd was arrested on suspicion of using a counterfeit $20 bill when Officer Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck while Floyd was handcuffed face down in the street. His death triggered protests across the country and calls for civilian oversight of law enforcement. Joining us now with more is Professor Sharon Fairley of the University of Chicago's Law School. She studies police reform and in her new work shows how police oversight has increased in the wake of George Floyd's death. Sharon Fairley, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Tell us what this new research, what you looked into and what you found.
Sure. Thank you, Brandis. So I have been keeping an eye on the largest 100 cities across the United States and the civilian oversight that has been developing in those cities. And just in the past 18 months, it's just skyrocketed in the wake of George Floyd. So we've seen cities large and small creating and then also enhancing civilian oversight powers. So there's been quite a lot of developing there.
Why has civilian oversight emerged as one of the top reforms that cities are implementing, particularly since George Floyd's death?
Yeah, so there's been a reform in a number of areas, but civilian oversight has, cities are really turning to civilian oversight as a way to have a formal mechanism for community input on policing, policies, and operations. And we're seeing cities actually asking to have a say in these policies, not being able to just make recommendations, but actually having more power to actually determine how policing is done in their locations.
So what kind of oversight do these panels or boards, agencies, what kind of oversight are cities implementing? What kind of authority do these agencies have?
Right. So sometimes they're boards, sometimes they're agencies, and more often we're seeing a combination of the two, where you have a city creating a board that oversees an agency that has professional investigators and auditors to do analysis that the board then makes recommendations based on. So we're seeing that happen. And it's really been, an advancement in the more intense forms of oversight. For example, the investigative model, where you have an agency that has independent investigative jurisdiction with subpoena power, which has been a source of great debate in many of these cities.
So are they providing the kind of transparency that protesters and people on the ground were calling for?
Transparency is a really key theme that we've seen in the last 18 months, to the point where you're seeing many cities are actually including the word transparency in the name of the entities that they're creating. That's how important it is.
Now, here in Chicago, the city is going to be embarking on yet a 5th civilian oversight entity. It is the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. You headed a previous iteration, the Independent Police Review Authority, before it became something else, COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. What does the success of these offices or agencies, what does the success of them depend on?
So the key thing is they have to be independent, and they have to be given the resources that they need to actually do the job well. And then they have to be given the formal powers in order to have an impact on how policing actually happens. And so that's what I think is really unique about the new entity that's been created here in Chicago. It will actually have some real power and teeth when it comes to policy development. And so that's what's really new and unique. The other thing that's really, I think, really a big opportunity for this new agency that's been created is the local boards that will be digging down at the district level to identify policing issues and challenges and then working on them directly with the department. So it is innovative in its structure, and so there's a lot of opportunity here to see how well it's going to do.
How would you say Chicago compares to similar cities, other cities that you studied?
Well, Chicago is amongst the larger cities that have multi-entity systems. So as you mentioned, we now have 5 agencies that approach accountability and oversight from a different perspective. And so there are several other cities that have that similar kind of multi-dimensional approach. And it's a very thoughtful approach because they've determined that just using one form of oversight may not be sufficient or sufficiently effective to drive the systemic change that they want to see happen. And so that's why we have this multi-tiered system that approaches oversight and accountability from different vantage points.
You mentioned independence, resources, authority, that those are, key pillars of making sure that these agencies or boards or combinations are successful. When you look across the city or across the country at other cities that you studied, are you finding that they have those?
Well, I think resources are a big question, and that's also been a big question here in Chicago for sure. Many of these agencies have not been given enough resources to actually fulfill the mission that they've been given. And so that they, for example, they will develop backlogs of cases. And that leads to great disappointment on the part of the community because they feel like they file a complaint and then it goes into a system and they don't get the answer very quickly. And so we're seeing that as a challenge across many jurisdictions, not just here in Chicago. And so resources continue to be a challenge. And so one of the questions I think that needs to be answered as we go along is, whether the budget floor, for example, that COPA has is actually enough, and it may not be enough. And so that's definitely a question that needs to be explored.
Sharon, another one of the things that we heard a lot after the death of George Floyd were calls to defund the police, and in a lot of cities, it seems that hasn't necessarily happened, but oversight has, according to your study. It seems like there's been a lot more oversight that's been implemented instead of for defunding the police. Would you say, obviously these two things are not, tit for tat, but would you say that is what's happening here instead of defunding the police?
Right. So when it comes to what I call right-sizing a police department, it's a very complicated question. And so it's not surprising that cities are grappling with that and are not jumping and taking immediate action before exploring what is the right way to achieve the optimal structure for public safety. But what we are seeing is a lot of experimentation in terms of cities that are saying, I'm going to test out the proposition of crisis intervention being done with a different resource rather than armed police. We're seeing cities talking about creating different kinds of resources to address traffic issues as opposed to an armed police force. So we are seeing some experimentation and exploration around the topic, even though we haven't seen budgets drastically reduced. We also know that we have, very significant violent crime problems in most of our larger jurisdictions. And so now it's just a very difficult time to talk about cutting police budgets when we are struggling to address violent crime. So until we can come up with some greater, more creative solutions to that, it may be difficult to sort of resolve that question right away.
A lot of work to be done, obviously, in policing. Sharon Fairley, University of Chicago Law School, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, how a local couple is navigating bureaucracy to bring home their twin babies born to a Ukrainian surrogate. Stay with us.
certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
We first brought you the story of a Highland Park couple anxiously awaiting word on the safety of someone they knew in Ukraine as Russia invaded the nation 3 months ago. That someone was their surrogate, due to deliver their twin daughters in July. Well, here's an update. The babies were born 13 weeks early. We revisited the family to find out how the babies will get home. Suitcases have been waiting by the front door for 2 months at the home of Jeff Sterling and Lilac Epstein.
Yeah, that phone call in the middle of the night, that's why the suitcases are out, because it can happen at any moment.
And Jeff and Lilac did get a phone call in the middle of the night in late April.
On the phone it said Ukraine, so I answered the phone.
Their Ukrainian surrogate, now in the Czech Republic, had delivered their twin babies by emergency C-section at just 27 weeks. While the early days were scary,
they're doing much better. And it's one day at a time. I know this is a process. They're going to be in there for another 4 to 5 weeks. But it's progress. It's certainly better than it was the first couple of days that they were born.
the twins have been moved out of the neonatal intensive care unit and are weighing in at just over 3 pounds each. And if being away from their newborns isn't hard enough, now Jeff and Lilac are navigating the bureaucracy of getting the right documents to bring the girls home from a country that doesn't recognize surrogacy.
Things are pretty messy right now.
Sam Everingham in Sydney, Australia runs the international nonprofit Growing Families, which has been helping other intended parents bring their babies home safely from war-torn Ukraine.
The issue is some of these babies are being born stateless because the country where they're born doesn't recognize them. And until the intending parent's country sort of steps in and gives the kids identity documents, the children don't have a clear identity as to who they are. And that's the confusion.
In the case of Jeff and Lilac, Jeff is the baby's biological father and would need to take a blood test to prove it. But for health reasons, he can't travel to the Czech Republic. They've been working with the U.S. State Department to ensure he can take the test here and Lilac can bring documentation herself. Next problem, both the surrogate, Victoria, and her husband need to sign away their parental rights.
And Victoria's husband cannot leave Ukraine. There isn't a U.S. embassy presence in Ukraine. He can't formally or legally sign this document in front of the U.S. a member of the U.S. embassy. And he did relinquish his rights prior to the embryo transfer. So with all of these different components, we're hoping that there's going to be some amount of a waiver.
As the couple waits to hear from the legal department at the U.S. Embassy in the Czech Republic, there's only so much they can be anxious about.
It can be overwhelming, but the situation is what it is, and at some point it will get resolved. So, yeah.
Yeah, the stress relief, like we said, is the progress that the girls are making. That's our main concern.
They've been working with an agent in the Czech Republic who keeps them posted and in regular conversation via text with their surrogate. When it's all figured out, Lilac is ready to make the trip to fly her newborn twins home from Europe alone.
I want that to be my biggest problem. With everything else that we've addressed, let that be my biggest problem.
Lilac says she hopes to head to the Czech Republic in the next couple of weeks to bring the girls home. But because that international trip is so long, the babies may need a medical transport to get here. Now, Paris, back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks very much. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, turning pain into purpose. The latest in our Chicago Tonight series on the impact of gun violence on victims' families. A recent Northwestern study shows that months after infection, brain fog and fatigue persist for COVID long haulers.
Let's think about Chicago, a crime-ridden, corrupt, dysfunctional hellhole.
And GOP candidate for Governor Darren Bailey has harsh words for Chicago. Our Spotlight Politics on that and more. But first, some more of today's top stories. Former Illinois State Representative Luis Arroyo gets nearly 5 years in prison. Arroyo pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud for his role in bribing a state senator to support legislation that would expand sweepstakes gambling in Illinois. Arroyo had been lobbying on behalf of the sweepstakes company while serving in office as a state representative. Employees at 2 Starbucks coffee shops in Edgewater have voted to unionize, marking the mega chain's first organized locations in Chicago. They're the 3rd Chicago area Starbucks locations to unionize, joining colleagues in northwest suburban Cary. 4 other stores in Chicago are currently voting by mail on whether to unionize, with results expected by June. It's part of a nationwide effort to organize Starbucks coffee shops. Workers at 260 other locations around the U.S. have filed for representation, and 90 have won their elections, organizers say. Speaking of elections, early voting in Chicago is delayed yet again. The Chicago Board of Elections announces early voting for the 2022 primary election will get underway on May 31st at the Loop Super Site. The date was originally set for May 18th and then pushed back to the 26th before today's delay. The reason: Cook County Court had to make some final rulings on ballot challenges, but it appears the final ballot is now officially set. The Loop Super Site is the only place to early vote in Chicago until June 13th, when early voting sites are expected to be available in each of the city's 50 wards. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. There have been 899 shootings in Chicago since the start of the year. As part of our Chicago Tonight special series, Turning Pain into Purpose, reporter Joanna Hernandez has been speaking with families about the hardships of losing loved ones to gun violence. She joins us now for the final piece in this series. Joanna.
Brandis, 18-year-old Miguel Rios seemed to be doing everything right. He was going to school, he had a job, and he was there for his brothers and sisters. But this July will mark 2 years since he was killed, and his family has yet to receive justice. Take a look at how his family remembers his life.
We're gonna go right now at 6. It starts at 6. We still have time.
It's a full house at Catalina Andrade's home. On a sunny day, the boys are playing basketball, but it's without their older brother Miguel.
He's the one that taught me everything I know.
With basketball?
Yeah.
Was he good? Or
Yeah,
más o menos?
he was really good.
He still has his flowers here, his cake.
All this family has left are memories, pictures, and items reminding them of 18-year-old Miguel Angel Rios.
One of the mothers that also lost her son gave me that one.
675 days have gone by since the last time Catalina heard her son's voice.
He came in my room and he said, "Mom, you know I love you," and he hugged me, but I never thought that was gonna be his last hug.
On a summer night on July 18, 2020, Miguel was shot and killed in Little Village. Miguel and his father had stayed in Chicago to work while the rest of his family were in Mexico.
What I know is that he went out that late to see the girlfriend. They were gonna meet or something. I don't know. So I guess on his way back, since the girlfriend didn't answer, he just decided to come back. And he was targeted, and they shot him. They robbed him.
Over there, my dad.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking about family trips or graduations, Miguel's brothers and sisters are left to learn how to live without their brother.
Me and him would always talk about school and how I was going to go to high school and he's going to drive me there. And then he will go to college after.
Miguel, nicknamed Chipo, had just graduated from UIC College Prep. He had a summer job, and his family says he was looking forward to attending the University of Illinois Chicago to pursue mechanical engineering.
He would always play around with my mom. "Oh, I'm going to make you a suegra." He's like, "I'm going to have a lot of kids."
Oh, my girlfriend's pregnant.
Yeah.
Like, "You're next." So he was a jokester?
Yeah.
He was really funny.
He would go to Target and like take pictures of the little Gary Bears and stuff. I was like, oh my God.
10-year-old Emily Rios says she's still trying to understand why.
I wasn't okay because I just saw everybody sad, and I didn't know. I didn't want to cry in front of my family because I feel like it would just make it worse, because my mom, she was really affected by my brother's death.
Catalina has had meetings with the police, the mayor, and the state's attorney, but says nothing has led to a crack in the case.
they took everything from him. Like, my son did not deserve what they did to him. And it's just a shame that I'm going on 2 years and I don't, like, there's nobody in custody. Like, nobody's responsible or paying for what they did to my son, and it just hurts me.
To her kids, she's mom, but to the world, she is a fighter, learning to navigate the criminal justice system.
I don't find a purpose why. I mean, this violence, it's out of control, and I think we need to start, like, by, you know, something needs to be changed in these gun laws. Like, people are out here with clips.
My mom doesn't let me go out because she's scared for my life, and I get where she's coming from. It's not safe out here.
15-year-old Anadela now hopes to pursue a career in criminal justice in honor of her brother.
I want him to be my motivation to move on in life and be somebody great like he was going to be.
That's the picture where he was just started working with his dad. I think he would be happy because he always knew the strong mom he had. And I think he's really happy for what I'm doing. That, you know, I'm not going to let this go. I don't want my son's murder to be another number to the city.
Catalina Andrade is also part of the campaign Mothers and Families for Justice, a movement she says was created to bring awareness to dozens of mothers with unsolved cases.
And Joanna, in this piece, you know, we just saw this amazing mural at the family home there, and we saw Catalina Andrade and her family touching that mural. Tell us, what do we know about it?
So it was painted by a local artist, and it's quite beautiful because you can see the handprints of every family member in the household. It's 8 of them. There's 6 children, and you could also see all the items that Miguel used to love. So he always wanted and dreamed of getting a pink car.
Oh, that's literally a touchstone for that family. Now, Joanna, these stories, you know, they're showcasing hard topics, but echoing the realities of what some families face every single day. And tomorrow, you're going to be talking to 2 of the mothers that we heard from in this 3-part series.
That's right, Brandis. No, this whole series is obviously heartbreaking, but important to talk about. And tomorrow, we'll speak to the mothers about the change they want to see and the work that they're doing.
Okay, Joanna, we look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And
now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
All right, thanks, Brandis. Brain fog, fatigue, and a compromised quality of life still persist for COVID long haulers months after infection. That's according to a new study from Northwestern Medicine following up from research in March 2021 tracking the effects of long COVID. That study initially found that 85% of long haulers experience 4 or more neurological symptoms which impact patients' quality of life and, for some people, their cognitive abilities. And joining us to break down these findings are Patrick Malia, a West Dundee resident and COVID long hauler patient, and Dr. Igor Koralnik, Chief of Neuroinfections, Diseases, and Global Neurology at Northwestern Medicine. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. Dr. Koralnik, we mentioned the first study last year and now the new study, so there were no significant change in neurological symptoms between these 2 studies. There were some differences, however, in other things. Decrease in the loss of taste and smell, so some taste and smell came back, an increase in heart rate and blood pressure and gastrointestinal symptoms. Dr. Koralnik, what do you make of these findings?
So Paris, first, thanks for having me on the show again. It's a pleasure to be here. And we wanted to find out really what everybody wants to know. How long is long COVID? And that's why we look at the evolution of neurologic symptoms in our non-hospitalized COVID-19 long haulers. And as you said, we saw that the most debilitating neurologic symptom persisted up to an average of 15 months from symptom onset. Those disorder of smell and taste improved over time, and the late appearance of disorder of gastrointestinal problems and variation of heart rate and blood pressure suggests that there's a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system occurring late in this multi-organ disease that is long COVID.
And Dr. Koralnik, is there enough evidence to say what percentage of long COVID sufferers will experience these late onset heart rate issues and blood pressure issues?
This is a study that is the first of its kind to look at evolution of neurologic symptom 15 months from onset. So we don't know exactly how this is going to translate in the rest of the population, but we know already that up to 30% of anyone who's infected with COVID-19 may develop long COVID. And this is a report from the Government Accountability Office that came out in March 2022, saying that at that time there were probably up to 23 million people in the U.S. who developed long COVID, pushing approximately 1 million people out of work.
And Patrick Mele, you are one of those long COVID sufferers. You were here last year talking about your situation. So first of all, remind us of what COVID did to you.
I got sick initially in March of 2020, and the primary thing that hit me at first was respiratory problems, which is one of the more documented aspects of it. After the respiratory issues, the brain fog, fatigue, things like that developed probably about 3 weeks after the respiratory problems subsided, and it got progressively worse. Didn't really see any improvement until I got introduced to Dr. Kornalik earlier this year. He's been the one that has helped me the most over the last 2.5 years. But it was the fatigue, brain fog, things like that, forgetting words, confusion, things like that.
And so these are the things you were suffering from when you visited us a year ago. Has anything changed over the last year?
Fatigue is getting better. Dr. Kornalik's got me on a good regimen. It's been slowly improving. I take leaps and baby steps sometimes, leaps and bounds other times. It kind of depends on just how my body responds to things. But I am seeing some improvement. I'm making progress, and I'm happy that I'm finally making progress. I went so long before without, which is kind of stagnated, and now I'm finally starting to see improvement.
Dr. Koralnik, what are the treatment options for those suffering from long COVID symptoms, and do all of those patients need to undergo some kind of therapy to get rid of those symptoms?
Certainly, excellent question. So 80% of patients who come to see us at the neuro-COVID-19 clinic at Northwestern Medicine complain of brain fog. And brain fog, it's a colloquial term given by the long haulers to their problem with memory, attention, concentration, multitasking abilities, in summary, ability to work in their current job. And what Patrick is doing is what we do, the most for our patients. First, they get screened in the clinic with standardized cognitive tests that allow us to determine, that there's a problem already. Then they get referred to the neurocognitive clinic where they see a specialist in cognition that then refer them for precision cognitive rehabilitation at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab across the street from us at Northwestern. And Patrick can tell you about his experience there.
Okay, Patrick, tell us about that experience.
I started seeing an occupational therapist about 6 weeks ago, and I just had my first initial consultation with a speech therapist last week, both of which are, well, the speech therapist is just getting started with me, but the occupational therapist has been really working hard with me to make improvements in the areas that I need the most help with. One of the focuses is just day-to-day lifestyle management. How do I get back to the normal everyday things that I used to do? So that's one of the first things we work on when I get there. But I was having an issue with strength in my hands. My hands were pretty weak. So we started building up strength. Actually, I was there on Monday, and what we did was we kind of did like a workplace training scenario where she gave me different things to do, wouldn't let me write it down. So because memory is an issue, and I had to respond on my own. Like, let's practice and let's get your memory working. Let's do a real-time scenario just so that way we can see how you respond and where we need to improve.
Sounds like you're having to, at some level, relearn a lot of cognitive and neurological functions. Dr. Koralnik, does the vaccine have any impact on long COVID or not, whether or not one has the vaccine?
Excellent question. So all the patients who came in the study in 2020 were enrolled before vaccination was available, and 77% of them got vaccinated before the second visit, and some, didn't get vaccinated. We had the opportunity to see if there was any effect of vaccination. You've heard from other news networks that vaccination may cure long COVID. There are people who don't want to get vaccinated because they're afraid that it's going to reawaken long COVID. And so neither was true. There was a neutral effect of the vaccine on long COVID symptoms. So we continue to encourage all the patients coming to the clinic to get vaccinated according to CDC recommendation, because even if they get vaccinated, they can still get, infected, can still get long COVID, but their disease is going to be much milder than if they were not vaccinated in the first place.
All right, important research here, and Patrick Malia, our wishes for your continued improvement. Our thanks to Patrick Malia and Dr. Igor Korolnik. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team with details on the newly passed Chicago casino. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Fireworks at City Hall over the Chicago casino proposal. Details of an FBI wiretap on former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and dueling GOP gubernatorial debates. Here with all that and much more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So the Bally's casino proposal was passed by City Council in a 41-7 vote. Now, the result of the vote was never in doubt, but there was a fiery exchange between Alderman Byron Sigcho-Lopez and Mayor Lightfoot, and I should stress this is just part of their exchange. Take a look.
We asked for a plan, Mayor Lightfoot, a plan to address that issue. That's what we need to hear from you. Not a plan that is going to be discussed after the fact.
You are out of order and you are lying. Almost every word that comes out of your mouth after you say your name is a lie. You need to stop, sir.
I'm not stopping because I have the right to speak. I am not discrimination.
You are a liar,
sir. I have
sir.
every right to speak as any other colleague. Enough is enough.
Yeah, enough is enough. Please cease and desist.
Everything I said here is a fact.
Please cease and desist.
Ouch, Heather. What's going on? What's the backstory here?
Well, Mayor Lightfoot and Alderman Sigcho-Lopez have never seen eye to eye on pretty much anything, and this was just the latest flare-up of this tension between them. It all started when the alderperson suggested that perhaps the mayor had taken campaign contributions from the people behind the casino. You heard her take direct exception to that, and it went on for, as you said, quite some time. And it really punctuated, which was up until then a somewhat sort of going through the motions debate, because as you said, everybody knew that the casino was going to vote today, and this sort of came out of nowhere. It did follow, however, some of the allies of the mayor blocking a plan from the alderperson to land or to downzone a church in Pilsen that brought a threat of a lawsuit from the Catholic Church. So that, I think, was sort of roiling in the background and sort of helped, fuel this confrontation.
A lot of passion, a lot of tension, but, still a 41-7 vote. So is this pretty much a done deal? Is there anything that could derail the casino now?
Sure. So as I said earlier, it's got to go to the Illinois Gaming Board. And we heard a little bit from Alderman Sigcho-Lopez said that now the city will start a traditional planning process. They'll determine sort of what road is going to go where in the casino property and exactly how tall it's going to be and sort of where the restaurants are going to go and how it will interface with the Chicago River. So there are still a lot of decisions left to be made. A lot of the alder people are frustrated that they had to sort of vote for it before they can figure out exactly how it's going to look.
Devil is always in the details, isn't it? Paris, is this a political game changer for the mayor?
I think the mayor certainly looks at that, and her team looks at that way. I mean, this is done now. It happened so quickly, and it seems like they wanted to get this done before they formally, officially launched their re-election bid here. And think of all the steps that had to happen to get here. I mean, Mayor Lightfoot said it's not a mayor named Daley. It's not a mayor named Rahm that got this done. It was Lightfoot. First, Springfield had to pass a bill to allow the Chicago casino. Then she had to go back and revise it and make it more palatable to a private operator. And then they had to pick a winner, and then they had to get it through city council. All those hurdles were cleared. So it's certainly a big accomplishment, and it means a lot of jobs. It could mean that private sector unions, labor gets on board Lightfoot's reelection. Maybe they endorse her over this because they're very happy about this. Business groups, restaurant groups are very happy about this. So there's so many different pieces of the pie in Chicago, of the political pie here, that this pleases. And so that's why the mayor wanted it so bad.
So also this week, we learned earlier that former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan was caught on a wiretap discussing secret payments to a political ally who was implicated in a sexual harassment scandal. Amanda, did we learn anything new, and what is Madigan alleged to have done here?
Well, we didn't. I'm not sure that the feds and leads, what we've released here, have, shall we use the term, landed the tuna with anything in what we. But what we did learn is that Madigan, who has previously said that he didn't know anything about some of the shenanigans going on with Kevin Quinn, who is the brother of Alderman Quinn, in fact, did, because there is a phone call where he was secretly recorded talking about this payout. By the way, Kevin Quinn was somebody who was ousted from Madigan's political organization. This was during the Me Too movement and really sort of kicked it off in Illinois, so allowed Madigan to save political face there by shoving out Quinn. But in fact, Madigan's allies arranged to pay him out $1,000, $2,000 a month to sort of give him a soft landing while he was having a difficulty, because of all of these very public sexual harassment allegations, finding work. And so Madigan had previously professed to be totally ignorant of it. But again, we have wiretaps there showing that he in fact did know. Is it illegal to have made these payments? Not necessarily, nor is there any allegation of such, but he was speaker then. Is it certainly unethical, and does it fly in the face of what he had professed to be true? Yes.
Something we talk about a lot here on Spotlight. Maybe it's not illegal, but it is questionable. Amanda, there were two dueling GOP gubernatorial debates yesterday. Why this two-debate format rather than have all the candidates on stage at once?
Good question, Brandis, because frankly, it was confusing to follow. Both of the debates, I think, were very well done. You had moderators who pressed for answers and tried to get clarifications, but you can't quite compare what the answers were because the questions were, of course, different. And really, it appears to have been a matter of scheduling. It's, I'd say, maybe some egg on the faces of both of the TV stations to have really allowed themselves to be played by the candidates. You had Richard Irvin, who is just barely atop the polls in one of the debates that was with NBC against two of the lesser known polling and really the single digits candidates. And then in the other debate on WGN, the number two guy, that would be Darren Bailey, state senator, as well as Jesse Sullivan and Gary Rabine, who are also in sort of that top tier of candidates when it comes to polling. So it was confusing really to follow.
And probably confusing for the voters. Now, in light of this horrific news out of Texas yesterday, gun violence broadly, as well as specifically in Chicago, has been coming up, as you discussed earlier, Amanda. Here's what State Senator Darren Bailey from downstate Xenia had to say about Chicago.
Let's focus on the city of Chicago a minute. Let's just call it like it is. Let's think about Chicago, a crime-ridden, corrupt, dysfunctional hellhole. And no one knows that better than the friends and the people that live in Chicago. Something's wrong. City leaders, they hate the police. At least they act like they do. City leaders lock children.
Amanda, did we hear anything on gun control measures last night?
Something's wrong, some might say, with the Bailey campaign in terms of that, because he had really been trying to say that he likes Chicago, spending a lot of time here, talking about spending time on Michigan Avenue. He, of course, had previously been one of the sponsors of a measure that would separate Chicago from the rest of the state. During the debate, he was pressed, hey, wait, hellhole, you want to stand by that? And he did. What did we learn? I'm not sure necessarily a ton from these candidates, but by and large, all of the candidates want to do away with the FOID system. That's the Fire Owner's Identification Card, the gun licensing program that Illinois uses, although they did not necessarily say that they are against licensing straight out. But all of the candidates during these debates talked, as do many gun owners, saying that there are flaws with how Illinois carries this out. There have been a whole lot of delays, particularly the pandemic, in processing those licenses.
Paris, we've only got a minute left. Urban, has had strong financial backing from the state's richest man, Ken Griffin, but he was also the focus of attacks from other candidates. Is he necessarily the clear front runner here?
Well, the Irvin campaign is sort of projecting themselves as a front runner, and other candidates are kind of targeting him. And you're right, he's gotten $45 million from the state's wealthiest resident, Ken Griffin, not to mention hundreds of thousands, if not millions more, from other very wealthy Illinoisans. But that one poll that came out had him up around 4%, very close to the margin of error. It's really hard to tell. And Irvin, of course, has had some issues in his background that we've reported on, and obviously other campaigns have used some of that in attack ads against him. I think it's just so hard to know. I mean, there's so many factors. Turnout, what's that going to be? What's going to happen in the next 4 weeks? Who's going to donate more money to what campaign? So I just don't put a lot of stock in polls right now.
All right, we're a month to the primary. Am I right, Heather?
You are. That is accurate.
Lots to talk about between now and then. That's Spotlight. Thanks, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabie family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.
Wednesday night on PBS, starting with nature.
How did this huge animal end up as our companion?
Followed by a new episode of Nova.
Footprints dating back to the last ice age.
And Columbia, Wild and Free.
This is the story of two landscapes that could not be more different.
Nature, Nova, and Columbia, Wild and Free.